Hey there, guys and gals, picture this. You're an ordinary high school student minding your own business when out of nowhere, you stumble upon a mysterious love letter. Intrigued, you decide to uncover the sender's identity, but brace yourself because it leads you down a rabbit hole of wild surprises and unexpected encounters. Get ready for the ride that is Hensuki. Let's explore this funny anime. The anime begins with our protagonist named Kiryuu, who is in the middle of a sexy dream with 3 girls that will meet soon enough. His dream is interrupted when he is awakened by his younger sister named Mizuha, who had climbed into his bed to sleep in the middle of the night. Kiki is flustered and tells her to stop because she reminds him of how much he wants to get a girlfriend. Upon arriving at school, he receives a message from his senpai Suki, the gorgeous big-breasted girl, who needs the protagonist's help in organizing the calligraphy club room as she spent all her time practicing and filled it with litter. Kiki calls all his friends and his sister as reinforcements. Yuka, the little one who's a year younger, gets upset because she doesn't get along well with Sayuki. Mao, his red-haired classmate, tells them to stop chatting and start cleaning. After a while, they finish cleaning and Kiki tells them to go rest since they work hard. He stays behind to finish storing everything, but doesn't expect to find a letter addressed to him just as he's about to leave. The letter confesses love to him. Kiki jumps for joy, but is stunned to find a pair of with the letter. He consults his friend Shuma, who doesn't know what to tell him because he's indifferent. However, the fact that the letter was in the club room narrows down the search. Kiki's mission is to find out who left the letter. He encounters Sayuki, who seems interested in going to the club room first and even invites him to sleep together there. However, Kiki declines the offer, and despite thinking it's highly likely that she is the one, he continues to investigate. Next, he goes to see Yuka, who was in the library. She asks about Sayuki, feeling envious of her busty figure because she believes it gives her an advantage with men. Since Keiki seems to share the same opinion, Sayuki leaves, but not without telling him that when a girl teases a boy, it may mean she's interested, leaving Keiki confused. Shuma asks Keiki how it went, but he doesn't notice any differences in their behavior. He also feels a bit envious of Shuma, who is quite popular. However, he believes that Keiki has enough potential to make someone fall in love with him. Keiki gets distracted when he sees Mao and gets hit by a ball, causing him to faint. Mao takes care of him in the infirmary. Kiki asks Mao if she would support him in a relationship with another girl, but this bothers Mao a bit, and she leaves, telling him not to count on her. On his way back home, Kiki encounters Sayuki, who was taking care of a puppy that wasn't hers. He feels a bit envious because he wishes someone would pet him like the puppy, so he seizes the opportunity, and to his good fortune, he is rewarded with a kiss on the cheek. Because of this, and also because according to Mizuha, Sayuki was the last one to leave the club room, Kiki concludes that Sayuki is the most likely author of the letter. He tries to ask her about it, but in his mind it sounds awkward, just as awkward as asking her out. Sayuki overhears this and accepts Kiki's invitation to go out on a date since he would treat her to a snack. Kiki feels a bit used, but Sayuki says it's not just about that, as she's very grateful to Kiki because without him their club would have closed last year. Kiki is glad he joined the club because he respects Sayuki a lot, but he asks if she feels something more for him. Sayuki blushes and runs away. The next day, she avoids him the whole day, which makes Kiki feel depressed. He seeks Mao's help, and she tells him he needs to be a bit more aggressive, and if Sayuki truly has feelings for him, everything will turn out fine. So Kiki follows Sayuki after school and intercepts her to tell her that he knows her secret, and that he is serious about her. Sayuki blushes and says it's okay, but she needs to tell him something the next day anyway. Kiki waits anxiously all day, and when the moment finally comes, he is surprised because what Sayuki wants to confess is that she is a master for the pet and wants Kiki to be her master. Wow! Kiki is taken aback by Sayuki's confession, as it's not what he was expecting. It turns out that his aggressive approach convinced her to become his pet since she is a who wants to be mistreated. Later on, Kiki overhears that the teacher found the club room door open. He tells Shuma that it might not necessarily be the last person who left because his new theory is that someone entered, hid, and left the door unlocked when Kiki left. He couldn't even ask Sayuki, so we'll have to continue investigating. He goes to the library and helps Yuka gather information, but Sayuki surprises him with her axe, causing Yuka to try to keep her away from Kiki. Sayuki refuses, stating that they are closer than Yuka thinks, and that they even went on a date. Kiki tries to defuse the situation by saying it was just for ice cream and offering to buy Yuka another one, but this only annoys her more. Sayuki continues mentioning events in a very disjointed manner, which irritates Yuka. However, Sayuki finds the book she was looking for and leaves. Kiki asks Yuka what she wants from Sayuki to calm her down, and she requests a date. Kiki ponders whether Yuka could be the girl he's looking for, but his sister overhears him talking about the date and gives him advice since it's his first date. Kiki follows all her guidelines, like arriving early, holding hands, going to see a movie, and taking her out to eat. He confesses to Yuka that it's his first official date since all he did with Sayuki was invite her for something, and Yuka is happy to be special as his first. Yuka goes to the bathroom, and Kiki finds himself amazed that he's on a date with such a beautiful girl. However, he realizes she's taking too long, so he goes to look for her and discovers that some guys are harassing her. Keiki steps in and apologizes, realizing that he should have anticipated such a situation because of her beauty. Yuka blushes and kisses Keiki for saving her, and she asks him if they can hold hands. When they return, Yuka falls asleep and Keiki admires her but remembers that due to her distinct appearance, she isolated herself from her classmates. She always stood alone and seemed cold, but Keiki slowly started talking to her and eventually the ice melted away, leading to the Yuka he knows now. The next day, Shuma asks if Keiki confirmed whether Yuka is the girl from the letter, but he didn't ask her because he was enjoying their first date. However, he receives a message from Yuka saying she wants to talk to him, and Shuma believes she will confess that she wrote the letter. Keiki goes to see her, but is surprised by her confession that she also has she wants him to be her slave. She thought he was perfect for the role, and since she's a cute girl, there shouldn't be any problems. Keiki is more confused than ever, and Yuka tries to encourage him by giving him her freshly worn. However, this does nothing to motivate Keiki. Yuka becomes more aggressive, putting the piece in his mouth and mounting him, but Keiki starts to suffocate, reaching the point of thinking he's going to. The next day, Keiki wakes up believing it was all a nightmare. But unfortunately, it did happen and Yuka had taken him to the infirmary, claiming he fainted after a love confession. Keiki doesn't want to go to school to avoid seeing Yuka, but he knows he can't skip without a valid excuse. He tries to avoid Yuka as much as possible, but she puts her bra in his locker and he can't ignore it, so he goes to talk to her. Yuka reads him a story she wrote which describes what she wants to do with Keiki. This traumatizes him even more as he realizes she wants him to become a dependent slave to his mistress, so he quickly runs away. As he's about to leave, he encounters another surprise, Sayuki threatening him with a compromising photo she plans to post online if he doesn't go to the club room. When Keiki arrives, he's surprised to find Sayuki dressed as a maid. It turns out that in the book she found at the library, maids were the closest thing to being a pet, so she decided to become one for Keiki. However, he just wants her to dress normally. Sayuki tells him it's okay, but the key to her handcuffs has fallen between her breasts, and she needs Kiki's help to retrieve it quickly because she's about to pee. Keiki has no choice but to extract the key. Sayuki scolds him for not being able to see her as often as before because a dog gets sad if it doesn't see its master, and she wants him to engage in all kinds of activities with her since she won't refuse anything. He faces a moral dilemma, and even his guardian angel succumbs to the temptation of her busty appeal. However, he is not willing to engage in such activities without love, so he runs away. The next day, Keiki tells Shuma that it's unlikely that Sayuki or Yuka wrote the letter, leaving Mao as the only option. Shuma agrees as she's always watching Keiki. However, Keiki is surprised because he thought Shuma was interested in Mao due to her popularity. When he tries to confront Mao directly, she rejects him, appearing upset, and Keiki doesn't know why. During recess, Sayuki asks Keiki to come see her, but on his way, Yuka blindfolds him and leads him to a room, claiming she's in order to tie him up. She demands that he kiss her or else she will steal his first kiss. Keiki doesn't know what to do and feels powerless as he doesn't want to kiss without love being involved. Luckily, Sayuki had gone to look for Keiki and overheard Yuka's delusions. She tries to free her master, but Yuka gets upset and orders her not to interfere because she's just an addict to mistreatment. Keiki is surprised that Yuka knows Sayuki's secret, but it turns out Sayuki confessed it to her the first time they met as she realized Yuka was going after Keiki. Amidst the commotion, Mao arrives and annoyed takes Keiki away. Sayuki and Yuka try to follow but stumble, allowing Keiki to escape. Mao scolds Keiki for being weak when it comes to Sayuki's breasts and for going on dates with Yuka. Keiki wonders why Mao is so bothered, and Mao reluctantly admits that she doesn't like seeing Keiki with other girls. Could she be the one? As a result, the atmosphere becomes tense between the protagonist and Mao, and Yuka realizes that Mao seems upset. The protagonist is surprised that Yuka can be so kind despite being a but she explains that she can switch between love and mistreatment. On the other hand, Sayuki apologizes for her actions that made Mao upset, promising not to him in public and only do so in private. However, she first needs to resolve the situation with Mao, as she doesn't want her master to lose a friendship because of her. The protagonist tries to talk to Mao, but she refuses, feeling abandoned by him. In order to make amends and seek her forgiveness, he asks her to go out together with Shuma, just like old times. They go to an arcade and Shuma playfully teases the protagonist, hinting at Mao's jealousy of him and allowing them to be alone. As they walk towards Mao's house, she asks the protagonist if they can be alone, just the two of them. But before he can process what he heard, it starts raining, and they have to seek shelter wherever they can. Because of the rain, the protagonist's gaze inadvertently shifts, making Mao nervous as she sees him as a predator. The protagonist decides to change the atmosphere by getting drinks since Mao is cold. However, when he sees her looking at some photos, he gets the impression that Mao is in love with Shuma, which saddens her, and she runs away. The protagonist is unsure if he misunderstood everything again and remains expressionless. The next day, Sayuki realizes that things haven't been resolved, so she decides to stay out of it until he resolves the issue. Yuka also notices the lifeless expression on the protagonist's face, but it's his younger sister who can't stay idle and offers him consolation. After hearing the whole story, she recommends that he go all out and be himself, as that will be the best approach. Although the answers are vague, the protagonist decides to talk to Mao no matter what and pursues her until she confesses that she can't stop thinking about him. He apologizes for everything and suggests they get to know each other better, wanting to start over. He is determined to do whatever she asks to restore things to normal, so Mao goes sincere. She has a too. The girl requests that he formally starts dating Shuma. What? The protagonist is taken aback by this request. It turns out Mao wants inspiration for her BL manga, and she draws from the interactions between Shuma and the protagonist. However, the protagonist firmly refuses and asks Mao to stop using them as examples, especially since their identities are not well hidden. Mao explains that it's impossible because the series is too popular and already has high expectations for its second installment. She warns the protagonist that if he refuses, she will make sure he never has a chance with any other girl. Despite the protagonist's reluctance, Mao remains firm. The protagonist becomes disillusioned, realizing that even Mao has a dark side. However, days later, he receives an unpleasant surprise when he finds another anonymous envelope in his locker. This time, it contains a photo of him with his hand between Suyuki's breasts. The envelope also contains a note asking him to go to the astronomy club, or else his reputation will be ruined. He hurries there and is greeted by an albino loli named Koharu. He wonders why so many strange things are happening to him, as his days have not been exactly normal. After rejecting Mao's offer, he finds Yuka in the club room dressed as a bunny girl, fulfilling his dream. However, he doesn't understand how it came to be. Suyuki explains that in order for her to be accepted into the club, she had to dress as a bunny girl for a whole day. Mao also joins the club, taking advantage of Suyuki's love for her BL manga by promising her a copy of the new edition. But she immediately threatens the protagonist not to reveal the real reason she joined, as she would then show her work to Mizuha. Thus, the club turns into a club. Returning to the present, the protagonist asks Koharu why she called him, and she confesses that she is in love with him. The protagonist believes she is the girl he has been looking for and accepts her feelings, but he is surprised when Koharu reveals that she is actually crazy about Shuma. She asks him to help her win Shuma's heart, so they go to a restaurant to plan their approach. The protagonist doesn't see many problems since Shuma has a preference for lolas, but Koharu is aware of this and knows it's impossible because she is older than Shuma. The protagonist finds it hard to believe as Koharu appears to be a little girl, but when he sees the color of her skirt, he confirms it. He contemplates giving up, but the photo won't let him, so he commits to finding a way to bring them together. Mizuha finds him deep in thought, and the protagonist buys her an ice cream and helps her with her shopping. Mizuha gives him good news that they will be switching to summer uniforms and everyone will wear the same color skirt. The only thing that will differentiate them is the ribbon, but the protagonist has it covered. The next day, the protagonist introduces them to each other, and Shuma is amazed, believing Koharu is a lower grade student. He melts when she calls him senpai, and the protagonist sees that his plan worked. Koharu's skin is very sensitive, so she always wears a hoodie, making it impossible to see the ribbon along her clothes. Koharu exchanges numbers with Shuma, and they even take a photo together, making her feel like her dreams have come true. The protagonist wonders why the girl from the letter hasn't contacted him, so he asks Koharu for help in figuring out who she might be. After analyzing the context, he realizes that it doesn't necessarily have to be someone from the club. It could be any girl who entered the club room that day, which means he has a long way to go to investigate. He goes to gather information at the club room, but changes his mind as the waifus are engaged in their usual activities. He comes up with the brilliant idea of asking the teacher, but encounters the vice president of the student council, Fujimoto, who slips and falls. The protagonist jumps to prevent her from getting hurt, and Fujimoto ends up on top of him, intact. He tries to tell her that she can get up, but Fujimoto feels odd and doesn't want to let go of him for a while. Later, the protagonist goes to ask the teacher if she saw anyone wandering around the floor that day, and she mentions that she ran into Fujimoto. This makes Fujimoto a clear candidate to be the girl who left the letter. While the protagonist contemplates this, Fujimoto appears behind him, having been searching for him to thank him for saving her. She gives him some chocolates, and as she has to leave, clings to him to take a sniff, claiming that she needed a recharge. Days pass, and the protagonist had asked Koharu to observe Fujimoto. They confirm that Fujimoto is an excellent student but slightly clumsy at times, which people find endearing. She spends a lot of time on the protagonist's floor due to her club activities. The protagonist goes to his club to think, but he encounters Yuka, who sets a trap for him and punishes him because she dreamt that he groped her breasts to make them grow. In an attempt to defend himself, he accidentally gropes her for real, making Yuka so nervous that she runs away. Immediately after, Fujimoto arrives to inspect the clubroom and ensure that nothing strange is happening. But more than anything, she wanted to ask the protagonist to volunteer to pick up the trash. Sayuki had been observing from a distance, seeing Fujimoto as an imposter, so she joins them when they go to clean up the trash. Fujimoto gets close to the protagonist, making Sayuki uncomfortable. She asks Fujimoto not to do it, but since the protagonist is free and not in a romantic relationship with Sayuki, Fujimoto gets even closer to provoke her. As soon as she can, Sayuki takes the protagonist away to mark her territory, starting to lick him and ignoring his pleas to stop. He remembers a similar situation when he was a child with his grandfather's dog, and his grandfather taught him the secret technique to keep the dog away when it does that. It involved grabbing its so the protagonist wastes no time and applies the same technique to Sayuki. She blushes deeply but enjoys it so much that she doesn't complain, eventually leaving on her own as she doesn't believe she can control herself any longer. The protagonist returns to Fujimoto, who notices that he found an adult magazine. She tries to leave him alone to entertain himself but ends up falling into the lake. The protagonist catches a glimpse of her translucent underwear and offers her his jacket, trying not to look too much. The next day, he tells Shuma everything he has been investigating about Fujimoto. They happen to run into her, but she keeps avoiding the protagonist, who believes she is still embarrassed about the previous incident. After a while, Fujimoto calls him to the student council room to thank him for lending her the jacket. She prepares tea and cake for him and then clings to him. He tries to make her be more cautious in case someone comes in, but Fujimoto has already taken precautions, assuring him that no one will interrupt them for a while. They both fall asleep while hugging. When the protagonist wakes up, he gets a big surprise as his pants are down. It turns out Fujimoto has a for people's scents, and at that moment, the protagonist's scent is her favorite, so she wants his freshly sweaty underwear to indulge in it. The protagonist laments the fact that she seemed like the only normal girl interested in him, but that wasn't the case. After connecting all the dots that made him think Fujimoto was the girl from the letter, he firmly refuses to give her his underwear. The days pass, and the relationship between Shuma and Koharu is going smoothly. However, it's not enough because if Shuma discovers her true age, he will most likely reject her, so they need to become closer. To achieve this, they decide to organize a double date. The only problem is that Shuma doesn't know who to go with. Yuka is too cute. Fujimoto would start sniffing everyone, and Mao would refuse to let Shuma have a girlfriend. The only option left is Sayuki. Sayuki is glad that she was chosen, even though it was the lesser evil. However, she's not good at sports, and to make matters worse, she has never played bowling before. Nevertheless, Sayuki is not afraid of success. She proposes a bet. The loser must let the winner paint their face, and the third person must obey a command from the winner. The protagonist hesitates because Sayuki is condemning herself, but Sayuki has faith. She doesn't believe that Koharu is very good due to her small body. However, she is in for a big surprise where she realizes that Koharu is an expert because she often comes with her family and even manages to come in first place. Shuma ends up in third place, so Koharu asks him to call each other by their names. Shuma happily accepts this because it's a dream come true for him to be treated with confidence by a lowly. After the date, Koharu is very happy because everything is going perfectly with Shuma. They talk all day and even plan future dates. Koharu believes it's time to leave the lies behind and confess her feelings. She waits for him after class and invites him to leave together. The protagonist can't help but feel worried, so he adopts the role of the stalker that Koharu used to be and follows them. Koharu begins to talk about the first time she saw Shuma, which was love at first sight, and she reveals her true age in order to confess her feelings. Shuma is surprised, and with a heavy heart, he rejects her because she's a fan of Lolis younger than him. Koharu has no choice but to leave the broken heart. The protagonist talks to Shuma because he doesn't think it's right to reject someone for such a trivial reason. Despite having the freedom to choose who he wants to be with, a vague response like "I like younger girls" doesn't do justice to all the effort Koharu put in for a whole year just to be able to talk to him. Shuma agrees and realizes that even though he rejected other girls before, this time it felt different. He decides to do something about it. The protagonist goes to see Koharu, and they start talking about Shuma's questionable reasons for rejecting her. However, he stops them because he feels more guilty than usual. He asks Koharu for time to be friends and leave his preference for Lolis behind in order to have a serious relationship. But this cliché response is too much for Koharu, as she sees it as Shuma's inability to reject her properly. Shuma feels even worse than before. However, it was all just bait because deep down, Koharu is okay with waiting for him. Everything seems to have turned out well, but Shuma turns on the lights and is shocked to see that the astronomy club is filled with photos taken secretly. This makes him reconsider whether he wants to try dating Koharu, as she seems to be a stalker. After this unfortunate ending, the protagonist resumes his search for the girl from the letter. He can't think of anyone since he ruled out Fujimoto. He wonders if it could be one of the girls from the club, who are cute but have overly developed sides. He keeps thinking and happens to see his sister changing, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. However, Mizuva knows he didn't do it on purpose, so she asks why he's so distracted. The protagonist asks her what she would do if she had the same as his waifus, and she immediately says she would call the police. This reassures the protagonist because he was starting to doubt if he was the weird one. Sayuki rings the doorbell because she wanted to see the protagonist and apologize for her behavior during a trash collection, blaming it on a lack of attention. She came to the protagonist to receive some love. The protagonist agrees as long as it doesn't go to the extremes of last time and wonders what he should do. He treats Sayuki like a dog and pets her belly, which makes Suki extremely happy to the point that she wants to reward the protagonist by snuggling with him. The protagonist is in paradise, but Mizuha enters, interrupting them. Seeing that she's interrupting, she leaves so they can continue in peace. The protagonist rushes to explain that it's not what Mizuha thinks, but the more he tries to justify himself, the worse it gets. Suki leaves because she has had enough, and the protagonist asks her to find someone else to be her master, but she refuses, saying that only he is worthy. Then, Yuka arrives, feeling bored, and decides to tame the protagonist. She brings a bunny costume for this purpose. The protagonist tries to refuse, but he is threatened with having Mizuha see his BL manga. He has no choice but to comply. Yuka takes photos to immortalize the embarrassing scene she witnesses and decides to reward the protagonist by giving him her. However, he tries to stop her because he's not interested, and Yuka falls on top of him. Mizuha goes to see what happened and is once again surprised. The protagonist tries to justify that it was Yuka who wanted to take off her but this doesn't fit Mizuha's parameters, so she doesn't believe him. Hours pass, and Mao calls the protagonist to ask how things went with the waifus, as they had planned in advance and overheard unintentionally. Upon learning that nothing happened to worry about, Mao wonders if the protagonist has ever had a girlfriend. He says no, and then Mao asks if he would consider her as the first one, but immediately says it's a joke, causing the protagonist to ask her not to play with his feelings. Mizuha overhears their conversation and confirms that the protagonist was the victim in these fortunate or unfortunate events. She is surprised that he is so lucky to have the choice between being a master or a slave, but reaffirms her position as the favorite because she is his younger sister. The protagonist returns to his room and realizes that the panties left by the girl from the letter are no longer there. He meets up with Koharu and Shuma to figure out what could have happened, and they conclude that it could only be Yuka or Suki. It wasn't premeditated to leave the panties there. Shuma and Koharu offer to check under their skirts, but the protagonist refuses because it wouldn't be morally right. He decides to find out for himself. First, he goes to Suki and tells her that he needs to talk to her. To make things easier, he becomes her master, and they go together to an amusement park to talk outside of school. He reaffirms his authority as her master, and since Suki is wearing a skirt, he takes advantage of the situation to go on rides with a lot of movement, hoping to catch a glimpse underneath her skirt. However, no matter how many rides they go on, the protagonist doesn't see anything. He decides to take it easy and asks Suki where she wants to visit because as a good master, he also wants her to have fun. Suki asks to go on the Ferris wheel. The protagonist realizes that no one can see them, so he tries to ask her to lift her skirt, but Suki anticipates him and licks him, causing his brain to explode and preventing him from thinking. Later, the protagonist visits Suki's art exhibition and asks her why she chose him as her master. Suki tells him that at first it was just because he joined the calligraphy club, but gradually she became more convinced that he should be her pet. As they are returning home, the protagonist takes desperate measures and asks her directly in the middle of the street. Suki is extremely embarrassed, but her personality prevents her from refusing, so she lifts her skirt, and the protagonist is surprised because he saw something he didn't expect. Back at home, the protagonist asks Mizuha if it's normal to go out without wearing pants, but she finds it impossible, which reassures him because it turns out that was the case with Suki. Because of this incident, Suki starts acting nervous and apologizes for going out like that. She realizes how uncomfortable it must have been for the protagonist and promises to consider it more in the future. However, despite saying all of this, Suki remains uncomfortable and can't stop looking at the protagonist. Yuka notices this and tries to make her jealous by getting closer and closer to the protagonist to the point where she even sits on top of him. Suki can't bear it anymore and leaves the club room. The protagonist talks to Shuma and Koharu, and they come to the conclusion that Suki is very important. The protagonist goes to talk to her, but is surprised to find that Suki had misunderstood the situation, thinking that the protagonist was still playing and just pretending to be difficult. The protagonist regrets having worried about it. Thanks to this, the protagonist doesn't hesitate to ask Suki if she took the underwear from his room, and Suki confesses to it. The protagonist thinks he has finally found the girl he has been looking for, but when Suki lifts her skirt, he realizes that they are his own boxers. Due to being so close to Yuka, Suki felt lonely and wanted something of the protagonist, so she is just although they already knew that. As the protagonist leaves school, he meets Yuka, who is waiting for the rain to stop. He accompanies her to her house, and since it's very cold, she invites him in to warm up. However, the protagonist sees this as a golden opportunity to find out if Yuka has the that were taken from his room. He checks and Yuka takes a photo of him and threatens him to become her slave as he had always wanted. And in school, the protagonist starts obeying everything Yuka says and Suki gets upset. However, Suki is aware that the protagonist wouldn't submit in that manner unless he was being threatened, as he prefers large breasts like hers. Yuka is also upset because her lemon-like breasts were brought into the conversation. She tries to get the protagonist to say that he likes them small, but he can't lie about that and confirms that he prefers larger ones. Regardless, he obeys Yuka without complaining. Seeing how he's being treated like a dog, Suki decides to leave because she can't bear to witness it. The protagonist starts to reflect and realizes that if he discovers that Yuka sent that love letter, he could reverse the situation of being threatened. So he continues to obey her, and the next day dresses as a butler to accompany Yuka for shopping. After feeling embarrassed while walking around dressed as a butler, they arrive and Yuka wants to take a bath after the long day. The protagonist tries to peek at her underwear again, but Yuka screams because there was a spider in the bathroom. The protagonist rushes to help her but sees her naked. Yuka forcefully kicks him out and punishes him for his audacity, although she also likes that he came to her rescue. She lies down on top of him and asks him to stroke her. She takes the opportunity to tell him that she loved her grandmother when she was a child and was always with her. However, when her grandmother died, she felt disappointed and chose to isolate herself from the world. Being alone became more of a choice than a result of her classmates' discrimination. But the protagonist kept talking to her despite her rejection and constant dismissals. He thought she was looking for mistreatment, but in reality it was her who was waiting for him. Because if she had wanted to distance herself, she could have simply stopped going to the library. That's why he is very special to her. Yuka goes to get something to drink, but is still shaken, causing her to trip. The protagonist notices that she has his boxers, so he interrogates her, and after forcing her to talk, Yuka confesses that she took them from his room. Now that they are within reach, the protagonist finally breaks free from the enslavement. The next day, the protagonist expresses his envy to Shuma because he now has a potential girlfriend during the vacation, while he has nothing but his friends. Shoma tells him that no matter how pretty Koharu is, she has some creepy aspects. When he went to her house, he found a bunch of videos of himself and a diary detailing everything he did during the day, so they are in similar situations. Later, the protagonist encounters Mao, who asks him to be her boyfriend, but only for the purpose of using him as a model to draw better. Normal people like him are difficult to draw, unlike Shuma, who is attractive. The protagonist is slightly offended and Mao asks him if being handsome is so important. He answers affirmatively, but she wouldn't understand because she is beautiful. Mao blushes and offers to draw him better in her manga as a token of gratitude, although the protagonist is unsure whether it is a reward or punishment. It turns out that an editor contacted Mao to offer her the opportunity to write a shoujo manga. She is looking for ideas about teenage relationships to broaden her horizons and gain experience, but she promises never to give up on BL, boys love. Since the protagonist doesn't have a girlfriend to provide anecdotes, she decides to become his girlfriend. She mounts him and asks him to make natural expressions so she can draw them. After embarrassing him a bit, she leaves with her quality material. Then the protagonist encounters Fujimoto, who wants to use him again as a source of scent, but this time they give him a 5-person pool ticket as a prize. He plans to invite Shuma and Koharu, but finds them lying on the ground. He jokingly says he'll call the envy police. After clarifying that everything was an accident, they refuse to go, but the protagonist sees one of the pictures on the ground and realizes it was taken at the time they left the love letter. He has finally found the person he had been searching for. He invites all the members of the calligraphy club to the pool and also invites his little sister to use up the 5 free tickets. His plan is to expose the girl who left him the love letter. However, they immediately start fighting over the protagonist to see who will play with him. Sayuki and Yuka have a duel to decide. Yuka wins and takes him to the water slides, but she didn't anticipate that they would scare her so much. Sayuki takes over and takes him to the wave pool, where her bra accidentally comes off due to all the movement. The protagonist leaves the pool and runs into Mao, who asks for his help in finding useful references for her drawings. She slips and he barely manages to save her, so he holds her hand to avoid any further danger. After all this, the protagonist looks for Mizuha because she had distanced herself to leave him with his waifus. He asks her to play together to make up for his abandonment, but she gets a cramp, so the protagonist has to carry her, triggering childhood memories for Mizuha. She takes this opportunity to confess her love to the protagonist, even though she knows he likes men. The protagonist is taken aback and explains that he saw Mao's manga, but Mizuha's feelings are genuine. They continue walking and come across Koharu, who asks for help from all the waifus because she is recruiting people for a declaration contest. Sayuki suggests that the winner can make a wish to the protagonist and all of them participate. The competition begins and Koharu introduces each of them. Each girl presents her but in the most adorable way possible to earn points. In the end, Mizuho wins and surpasses the score limit with the power of sibling love, which the protagonist finds a bit unsettling, but he sees it as a family love. Mizuha is happy because now she has a wish from the protagonist that she can use at any time. She is surprised that the protagonist doesn't go with his waifus, but he explains that he has something to talk to her about. He apologizes in advance and lifts her skirt, revealing that she was the one who left the love letter. Mizuha is surprised that he caught her with such an elaborate plan, but she still wants to know how he knew it was her. The protagonist explains about the photo he found, and since the time it was taken didn't match when she left, the rest of the story fell into place based on his assumptions. Mizuha is surprised that he guessed everything she did and proceeds to declare her love for him. admitting that she's in love with him even though they are not blood related. However, the protagonist apologizes and says he cannot accept those feelings from his little sister. Mizuha tells him she understands, but there is nothing to worry about because they are the same age despite being born 5 months apart. The protagonist thought they were hastily arranged, but Mizuha knows there is a limit to how fast they can progress. This means they are still siblings, and he decides to keep things as they were. And the protagonist can't sleep well due to the nightmares he has. This time, he dreams of marrying Suki in a romantic relationship. He manages to wake up, but unfortunately, the reality isn't better because Mizuha got into his bed and gives him a good morning kiss. The protagonist scolds her and forbids her from doing that again, so Mizuha jumps on him to make him aware of the feelings she's giving him. The protagonist feels too good, but his values don't allow him to continue down that path, so he decides to leave home and calls his dad to confirm that they aren't blood related. His dad calmly confirms this, but also adds that Mizuha is his favorite daughter. Then the protagonist goes to Shuma and Koharu to tell them, and they are greatly surprised to learn that his little sister is the girl they have been searching for all this time. However, they can't offer their homes to the protagonist since Shuma has visitors, and if he stays with Koharu, Shuma would become a jealous boyfriend, so the protagonist decides to handle it on his own. The protagonist sits in a park contemplating everything and encounters Mao, who invites him to share some food since he looks terrible. She also encourages him to reconcile with Mizuha, but realizes the kind of problem they've been dealing with, so she regrets her previous threat to interfere in any relationship he might have. Meanwhile, Mizuha falls asleep but is indecisive about what to say to the protagonist. On the other hand, the protagonist wanders aimlessly. Unfortunately, it starts raining and Mizuha goes out to look for him but without success. She returns home to prepare dinner. Later, she hears the protagonist coming back, but he caught a cold from being in the rain. So she goes to the supermarket to get something that will help him. Minutes later, the protagonist wakes up and is surprised to see Suki there because Mizuha ran into her at the supermarket. So Suki gives him special care and climbs into his bed to share her warmth, falling asleep there. Yuga also arrives and is surprised to see this scene. So she hands the protagonist some books and then forcefully kicks Suki out since she will be the one taking care of the protagonist. Both of them start fighting over who will help the protagonist, but this annoys Mizuha because she feels a bit jealous seeing them clinging to him, so she kicks them both out. After everything that happened, the protagonist remembers when Mizuha came to his house and feels guilty for forgetting it, but he needs to use the bathroom. Once again, he encounters Mizuha completely. Mizuha is even more surprised that he can walk, but the protagonist has doubts, so he asks her when she fell in love with him. Mizuha answers that it was when they first met because she had just lost the people she loved the most, and the protagonist welcomed her with open arms. That's why she never wants to be separated from him. The protagonist understands her feelings and makes a decision to keep things as they were, treating her as his sister, even though they are not blood related. And so our story ends with the protagonist thinking that he is still single, but now he's surrounded by girls. Still, after the credits, we can observe that Mizuha asks him on a date where he can be his boyfriend for only one day. He accepts and they go out together, and the last thing we hear is our dear protagonist trying to reject Mizuha. Yes, everything stays the same. And that's all, folks.